Hello there everyone, you've tuned in uxwbill, and in today's video I present for your viewing pleasure a trifecta of dehumidifiers, each one having a different problem. I'll go ahead and start with the best unit of the bunch, although that description is certainly subject to some further qualification, which I'll get to in just a moment. This particular Kenmore model was purchased brand new by my grandparents in the late 1980s or early 1990s. It's been sitting dormant for a particularly long period of time just because we hadn't needed it until recently, when the basement in a house that we own, not the house I live in, not the Roach Palace, not the Key Keeper's house, all of those are fine, took on just a little bit of water and needed to be dried out. So this and the trusty early 1970s Sears Cold Spot 30 both went over there. Only one of them, however, emerged victorious. The Cold Spot 30 is just an unstoppable tank of a thing, and it ended up dehumidifying that basement single-handedly because not long after I took this particular unit over there, it began to have some problems. The first problem wasn't anything more than cosmetic or particularly audible in nature. Just had to do with the fact that the rubber grommets holding the compressor in place and isolating it from the frame of the unit have probably become worn out and dried out, and they no longer isolate the compressor from the body of the dehumidifier. So whenever you turn it on or you turn it off, it tends to shake itself violently. Something that certainly ought to be fixed, but definitely not a serious problem. The more serious problem didn't come along until several hours later when I went over there and discovered that the basement lights wouldn't turn on. That's a clever thing to do, to wire all your basement outlets on the same circuit as the lighting. So if something should go wrong with something that's plugged into the outlets, there you are sitting in the dark, wondering what in the world to do about it. But I digress. Yes, indeed, folks, this particular unit threw the circuit breaker at that particular house, and I think I know why it threw the circuit breaker. To better explain that, I'll go ahead and see if I can turn it around. So this is definitely one of those things that I hate about these ribbed bed liners that so many people get in trucks, and if I'd have purchased this truck brand new, I would have gotten myself a nice soft bed rug like I had in my S10. It was so much better for this sort of thing. This particular dehumidifier has some key differences in its design from other models, both offered for sale both then and now. One of the first things that they've done differently, they've designed the coils a little bit differently. A lot of dehumidifiers typically have a circular evaporator coil. This one has a much more conventional, at least as far as what's seen in air conditioners, finned coil design with these C-shaped and D-shaped end loops. There's a certain problem I've noticed with these late 80s, early 90s Sears Kenmore dehumidifiers, which were actually manufactured by Whirlpool. A great many of them have lost their refrigerant charge. I've seen them cast out alongside the road. And I think the reason has to do with possible galvanic corrosion being set up due to the use of different metals that are interconnected together in the cooling system. Not 100% sure of that, but I've seen so many of these things that have lost their refrigerant charge, and even those like this one that are still holding on to it. They've suffered an awful lot of degradation and corrosion on these coils. And I can only think that there's some sort of a galvanic reaction taking place. But that's not why this unit threw. It's the circuit breaker protecting the outlet it was plugged into. There's also this louvered grille on the back, which might have originally contained a filter when it was new. However, that's probably been lost to the sands of time. The problem with this particular unit is likely to stem, at least in my opinion, from these two switches. Now this is different from the way most dehumidifiers are designed, in that there are actually two switches on this particular model. The first one does exactly what you'd expect. When the bucket fills up with water, it gets pushed in and the unit in turn shuts off. Now I may have the exact functionality of these switches reversed. It's entirely possible that I do, but that doesn't really matter. The second switch is utilized to determine whether or not the bucket on this model happens to be in place. So if you leave the bucket off and you accidentally turn it on, you won't end up flooding your entire floor or worse. You may be wondering then, how does this unit cope with the possible usage scenario involving connection to a floor drain or a hose leading to a floor drain? The answer is simple. At the bottom of the bucket, there is a threaded connector to which a hose may be attached, and in fact, once upon a time, this unit had that hose attached to it. Someone simply drilled out the plastic so that the water would drain out of the bottom of the pan. The problem, I believe, here has to do with hysteresis, and in case you're unfamiliar with the term, hysteresis refers to the quality of a system that wants to stay in the state that it's currently in. A good way to think about this would be to consider your household thermostat. It's a great example of the hysteresis technique. If your thermostat responded to every minute variation in temperature, then your furnace and air conditioning would cycle on and off an awful lot. It'd waste a lot of energy, it would put unnecessary wear and tear on the system, and you'd probably never be particularly comfortable. Instead, almost every thermostat that's ever been made lets the temperature fluctuate by a degree or two either way, i.e. if the system is currently off, it wants to stay off unless there is a significant swing in the temperature that it sees. Likewise, if the system is on, it tends to want to stay on. So that's what hysteresis is, and dehumidifiers definitely make use of it as well, not only in their humidistats, but also in their water bucket switches. If this thing were particularly tight and precise in its metering as to how full it let the bucket get, it might tend to cycle on and off particularly undesirably and often, which again would tend to wear it out and possibly run up your electric bill unnecessarily. In this particular unit, unlike a lot of others, the hysteresis is employed by this spring band. Now this approach probably worked well when the unit was new, but over time the weight of the world, certainly the weight of the water bucket, has weighed down on this thing and caused it to become limp. Now a person could retighten this spring, and I certainly did try to do so. The Sears manual even discusses the possibility of doing so. There's a hint pointing to that in the bottom of the bucket. It says see other instructions in manual. Also says this side into unit. There is an adjustment procedure given in the manual, if memory serves, that explains how to set this spring band up. But at the time I wanted to press this particular unit into service, the manual wasn't handy, and so I just adjusted the spring band by trial and error. What I suspect happened to this unit, when the water bucket became partially full, I'm guessing that because the spring tension wasn't quite right, and the unit tends to vibrate when it starts and stops due to those blown rubber mounts I mentioned earlier, that the bucket tended to go up and down like this in a very rapid fashion. Sat there and rapid fire triggered the switch. Eventually the compressor managed to build enough pressure that it would draw an enormous amount of current if it tried to start, and the unit subsequently popped the circuit breaker. Like I say, it's only a theory, but that's the theory I've got on that particular unit. When I restored power to the circuit this unit was plugged into, I left its switch turned on, and in something that I believe to bolster my theory about what went wrong with it, I noticed that the moment power was reapplied, and this thing still had a partial pan of water in it, it was making this horrible juddering and shuddering sound that was extremely audible from across the room, like it was in fact being rapid fire turned on and off by a switch that wasn't making and breaking like it was supposed to. In an effort to confirm my theory about the problem this unit's suffering from, I've left it sitting here on the tailgate of my truck, just dehumidifying the great outdoors. Kind of a wasteful thing to do, only to try and prevent that switch from even lingering in a difficult area, since I've had no luck adjusting the spring band on this unit, and we'll have to revisit that at some point in the future. I've simply put a lead acid battery in there and taken the brass plug off of the back, so it'll simply drain out onto the ground. Probably let it run like this for a couple hours, just see what happens. I find it rather curious, although it is of little practical importance, that the O in Kenmore has been rubbed off of this unit, and almost all the other letters, with the slight exception of the first E, are still perfectly intact. Doesn't matter, but I've really got to wonder how somebody managed to do that without affecting the other letters nearly as severely. Now, on to the white thing over here. You know something? Modern dehumidifiers are very expensive. Actually, all dehumidifiers are very expensive, and I really have to admit I don't understand why that is. They are much more expensive than a standalone air conditioner, and that's all in the world a dehumidifier really is. It's an air conditioner whose cooling output has been short-circuited by placing the condenser coil right after the evaporator instead of isolating the two from one another. An unfortunate problem with a lot of modern dehumidifiers is the fact that they are not only garbage, they are expensive garbage. And this, of course, is a thoroughly modern dehumidifier that likely fits into this category. Now, this particular unit was manufactured by Haier, who is a Chinese company. They recently bought up General Electric's appliance division. And while I certainly don't mean to badmouth Haier, and I've had some good results with appliances of theirs in the past, I currently own a chest freezer of theirs that was sold under a private label brand at a Lowe's home improvement store. Been very happy with the thing. It's well made, it's lasted well. I don't know that it would last as well as something that was made by an American company in probably the 1960s, 70s, or 80s, but I've been perfectly happy with it. Even so, there is just a depressing tendency for these modern dehumidifiers to be junk, and expensive junk at that. And in the case of this particular unit, I found it thrown out alongside the curb. Its previous owner was cleaning out their garage. They saw me pick it up. And when I did so, they came out and told me that the unit would turn itself on, but that a short period of time later it tended to power itself off. If I had to guess, I'd say that if it isn't operator error, it might well be a malfunction in these electronic controls. Once again, I would like to point out that a mechanical control such as the humidistat on this particular unit is typically found switching the full current of both the compressor and the blower fan. It's subject to a lot of wear and tear, as whenever those contacts make or break, there is a considerable arc. And yet those switches tend to last for at least 40 years, if not more, without any trouble or degradation whatsoever. In fact, only recently did I finally have a signature by Montgomery Ward dehumidifier whose humidistat finally gave in after 45 years of use. The electronic controls should have no problem exceeding that reliability, and yet they don't, because they're cheap crap. So if it's not operator error, it's probably a fault with the electronic controls. I'm going to go ahead and plug this unit in and just see what it happens to do. And of course, all of you out there in the viewing audience will get to watch as well. We'll get to that in just a moment. Now I want to turn my attention to this thing. And this, folks, this is really, really sad. This is probably one of those open and shut or basket kind of cases. I found this cast off alongside the road, almost laying in someone's yard. This is a 25-pint Aqua-Dri brand automatic frost-free dehumidifier, and I don't know what happened to the poor thing. I don't know if it failed somebody and they just decided they were going to toss it out in any way that they possibly could. I don't know if it was stolen and vandalized. There's certainly been a non-zero amount of that going on here lately. Unfortunately, I have some personal experience with that. But I think this poor thing might be worth a chance, because looking at it, none of the wiring looks to be ruined, and the sealed cooling system definitely appears not to be broken anywhere. The capillary tubing certainly still looks to be intact. The pinch-off point where they would have charged the unit at the factory, it's a little rusty, but it's there. There's a little rust on that line leaving the compressor. This other line is insulated, so we can't really tell for sure about it. There's a frost detection switch on it. So if this unit is operating in an area that's too cold, at least when it was new, it would have turned itself off appropriately when the temperature dropped too low and the unit started freezing up. It's got a Samsung compressor in it, which is something I haven't seen too terribly often. And apart from the fact that someone seems to have been trying to just beat the hell out of it, for want of a much better way to put it, if it actually still works, if its refrigeration system is holding a charge, I don't really care how it looks. It might well be worth saving. There's the evaporator coil in the more conventional circular design, concentric rings. The water simply drips off of the bottom of those. I did not get the drip pan for this, so we'll have to improvise a little bit, find something to push this switch in so we can do an accurate test of the unit. I say, it's definitely had some abuse, but I think there's a chance that it might come around. I don't actually have any idea who manufactured this. I'd almost tell you it was a private label arrangement, because no manufacturer's name actually appears on it, but there is an address, 265 North Hamilton Road in Columbus, Ohio, USA. You'd be writing to the dehumidifier department apparently. And interestingly enough, it was made in Korea. This unit uses R12, so my guess is that it probably dates from the late 80s at the newest. Here, of course, is a schematic explaining how various things work. Since this unit has been so heavily abused, I want to run some tests on it real quickly just to find out whether or not it would actually be safe to plug it in, or if there is in fact some sort of a serious problem with it that would explain why it was tossed out so brutally. It's kind of a shame though if it does turn out to work. The first thing we'll do, we'll go ahead and take our multimeter here and we'll swap out the test probes. I apologize for all the noise that the neighbors are making. They're pressure washing their house right now. They seem to time this stuff so well when I'm trying to make a video. We'll put this on the resistance range. Certainly warm enough out here today, isn't it? Although obviously the camcorder would much rather focus on the trees. Evidently it's got the problem that some people have. You can't see the forest for the trees. And we'll put these on here like so. We'll turn the humidistat all the way up. And we'll push in that cutout switch, which definitely goes open when it's pushed in, so it's a normally closed switch. If we let it go ahead and close, we see the resistance building up, and the values certainly look plausible, so it doesn't seem like there's a hard short anywhere. There could be some partially shorted turns in the compressor or the fan motor, either one. Could be that one of the two is locked up, although the fan motor definitely turns freely. So let's go ahead and see if there's any short to ground problems. For this particular test, we should get very high to infinite resistance, and indeed we do. So we'll go ahead and switch our other test over here. We'll switch to the other pin on the plug. Once again, we have very high resistance, so it seems like, in theory at least, this thing doesn't have any shorts to ground. Seems to have reasonable resistance across its input power connections. So it's probably worth giving it a try, just seeing if it does anything. Now, unfortunately, if there is a problem with the sealed refrigeration system, I can't do anything about it. If the compressor's shot, it's really not worth trying to put a new one in there. It would exceed the purchase price of a new unit in all likelihood. And I'm not presently licensed to handle refrigerant, although that is something I'm working on getting. But if it's just an electrical problem, or someone who just decided they had to have the newest shiny, even though it probably won't give them half the service this machine did, well, there might be some hope. So let's go ahead and plug this thing in and just see what it happens to do. Okay, so I've gone ahead and set up a couple of different multimeters here. These two units are measuring temperature. This one, I have a Type K thermocouple that is wedged into the condenser coil. And on this one, I have another Type K thermocouple that is wedged into the evaporator coil. Hopefully they're both making decent thermal contact with it. And then over here, I have an amp clamp hooked up to one of the power leads, leaving the overflow switch on this particular unit. So that should provide a reasonably accurate figure. This is not, of course, the most accurate device in the world, but it will do for our purposes. The nameplate rating on this unit is given as 7 amps. The only other thing I need to do here, I need to secure the control panel so that it won't fall off when this unit starts up and potentially short out on something. And I have a very high-tech method by which I'm going to do that. And there, folks, you have it. My unwavering commitment to only the finest engineering and repair solutions has emerged victorious. Go ahead and turn the humidistat all the way up here. Although as soupy as it is out here right now, I definitely don't need to do that in order to get results from this thing. I will admit I'm a little gun shy about doing this, just because the last time I did, I rescued a dehumidifier out of the roach palace. It had been dormant for a long time, and it ended up throwing a breaker. But here we go, folks. Today's a gift, that's why they call it the present. And there's no time like the present. Plus we have this wonderful thing called a 20 amp circuit breaker that will save our bacon if something is stupidly wrong with this thing. There could still be a bit of an arc flash from the outlet, but we'll see. Okay, the fan's running. Let's see what else is going on over here. I don't hear a compressor. and there's not very much current draw, so we're probably only powering the fan. So we'll have to take a further look, see what's going on in here. But it didn't blow up right out of the gate. That's got to count for something. There is a thermal protector on the compressor that may have gone bad. Or the compressor could just be faulty. It could have just locked up. Well, guess what, folks? I stand corrected. The compressor is running because I touched this refrigerant line here and it's just blazing hot. Of course, we have some current draw, a little lower than what the nameplate indicates. Evidently, whatever these wires do, they're not carrying a great deal of this unit's operating current. I haven't traced the wiring in this unit carefully enough to know for sure what all's going where. But if we look at our thermometers here, things are starting to happen. We have 90 degrees on this one, we have 65 degrees on the other, and we are starting to sweat big time back here. I think there's a possibility this thing might work. See if I can get maybe some better readings here. Temperature on that side's falling pretty fast. It's 82 degrees out here right now. May not have the best connection for this one, but it is hotter than ambient. So I guess we'll just let this thing sit here and run for a while just to see what it does. See if it manages to blow itself up. But that's a real shame, especially if some damn fool vandalized a perfectly functional dehumidifier. I'll figure out how to fix it. I don't really care if there's ever a grill down here. But I'm thinking I'll do what the keykeeper did as far as fixing this part's concerned. I'll just drill a hole here, and I'll drill a hole there, and drill a matching hole in the cabinet, and just run some zip ties through it. Maybe do the same thing down here, wherever I can. I do have a grill off of another dehumidifier that did lose its refrigerant charge some time ago. Maybe I could even lash something up with that, I don't know. Might be possible. I don't really care how it looks as long as it works. Because like I say, these things are crazily expensive. Unfortunately, I don't have a line splitter to plug into my extension cord between the dehumidifier and the cord itself, which would give me the most accurate of results. We'll just keep an eye on this thing, let it run for maybe a half an hour or so, and see what it does. It looks to me, at least preliminarily speaking, like it's fine. It's not getting too hot. At least not yet. Doesn't sound bad. Ladies and gentlemen, check that out. This thing hasn't been running for quite 2 minutes yet. And look at what it's managed to do. Here we are about a half an hour later, and this unit still appears to be working perfectly well. I went ahead and moved the location of this particular temperature probe because it didn't look like I had very good coupling with the condenser coil. So I simply put it on the hot gas line here. Got it taped in place with a little bit of tape that's probably not rated for high temperatures like that. But there's what we're getting on the hot side. And over here on the cold side, again subject to the accuracy and tightness of the coupling between the thermocouple and the coil itself. That's what we're seeing on the cold side, the evaporator coil. And this unit just continues pouring out the moisture. So all I can figure is that either it was a victim of some vandalism. Like I say, there have been some punks around here engaged in that sort of thing lately. Very unfortunate situation. Or somebody just decided they had to have the newest and the best. I did hear this unit make an odd noise. It sounded for a moment like the fan struck something. So maybe the fan blades themselves are loose. The only thing I have left to test here is the humidistat. And probably also, just for the sake of completeness, the shutoff switch as well. Okay, the shutoff switch works. And the compressor protection works. So we'll go ahead and see if the humidistat works to turn the unit off. I wouldn't say it was real accurate, but it may really be that humid out here. So with a little bit of cleanup, I think this unit could go on to live a productive life. Just have to find some kind of a drip pan for it or something, which, like I say, I might have in my parts library somewhere. But still, it just amazes me for what these things cost, and the fact that the new ones are just made of pressed refuse that people would give up on an older functional unit like this. That said, on to the white thing. The more I look at this particular unit, and I haven't even made it very far into things just yet, I'm starting to think there might be operator error involved in here somewhere. Pretty sure this filter's not supposed to be resting down in the drip pan like that. Also doesn't seem like it's been installed with a great deal of care or attention to actually having done so properly. Plus again, this thing is just filthy. You know, as for what somebody would have paid for one of these things, I would have really expected them to take much better care of it. I should know better though. I think years of experience to the contrary would have finally taught me. Yeah, that filter doesn't really go up into the track like it's supposed to. I see how it's meant to go. There's a little track in there that you may or may not be able to see. I don't even think this camcorder's light can shed any illumination on the situation. I'll have to see if I can get that to go up in there properly. I get it to go in on one side, but not the other. Or, you know, whee! I could just leave it out of there. Probably doesn't have to be there to work properly. Then there's this little drain hose. There's probably some sort of a cap that originally screwed on there that I simply don't have. Most of the locations I'm responsible for don't have floor drains in particularly convenient places for use with dehumidifiers. Let's just go ahead, see what we can get this thing to do. I don't know why that tube does not want to come out of there nicely. Well, I plugged it in, I heard a beep. These LED displays came on for just a split second, and now it's telling me that the bucket is full. Interesting that that light appears to be driven by a pulse width modulated source, because it appears steadily on to my eyes. Let's see if I can get this thing to acknowledge that the bucket's been properly installed. Might take a little diddling around, so I'll be right back. Alright, I did some fiddling around with this unit. And in addition to the fact that the fit and finish of the plastic drain tray is extremely poor, maybe that's due to aging of the plastics, maybe they were so cheaply made and chosen for this particular product that they've swollen and contracted in odd ways. This thing is certainly broken right here. Somebody did a number on that, which might explain part of the problem with the level switching mechanism. It tells this thing to turn off whenever the bucket's full. But I went ahead and pushed in this switch, and the unit does indeed respond to that. And if I hold it in, it will actually turn on, but sure enough, after a couple of seconds, it just shuts down. The control panel blanks out and everything. I can turn it right back on again, but there's no action from the relays or anything like that. So I'm guessing that the problem is almost certainly in this electronic control panel. I would go so far as to say it's probably another victim of bad capacitors or something along those lines. Interesting what you find in this stuff. Here's a United Parcel Smashers information tag. I guess it would have indicated an attempted delivery. I don't know why there's like a whole pad of them in here. Just the things that happen to stuff, I guess. I don't know if there's any way to tell for sure when this unit was manufactured, but this absolutely never should have died. There's no excuse for it. And when I did get this thing to run, it sounded like crap. Well, that sounds like crap. You saw how beat up this unit over here was, how much it's been through. It still ran perfectly well. Seemed content to work just fine. Let me see if I can go ahead and convince this thing to turn on. And we'll do a little A/B comparison here. I don't know if it'll actually start up or not. It may have a timeout in it. Or it may be that the control panel has just decided it's not going to cooperate any longer. But the fan in this thing almost sounded like it was stirring rocks. See there, it just turned itself off. Just absolutely will not cooperate. The compressor ran nice and quietly. But how easy would it be to screw that up? I don't know. That's too bad that this thing is just such a cheap piece of junk. I'll probably see if I can fix it. Probably pop the control panel out of it sometime and do a little investigation, because the strange behavior would definitely seem to point the finger at some sort of passive component failure, drifting way out of tolerance or something along those lines. And then as for this unit, well, I'm just going to have to try to get this band adjusted properly and see if that makes the kind of difference that it ought to. So, as always, folks, thank you for watching. Do feel free to leave a comment if you happen to have one.